Hello, everybody, and thank you back for joining us for another week of Blumira Briefings, your weekly download of the most important headlines for your security practice with the context to make them useful. I'm Zoe Lindsay, and I'm joined today by two of my teammates, Justin Kikani and Nick Dixon. Say hi, gents.
Hey, everyone.
And I'm really excited because normally I feel like half of our time is taken up talking about the most important updates that came out during the week. We had a blessedly light week for massive CVSS 10 necessary immediate install updates, which means that this week we actually get to talk about some of the broader stories and a little bit of more deep strategy and analysis than we usually do. So I'm very excited for us to dive in, which, to start us off, I will make mention of a story we covered before. Microsoft Exchange 2016 and 19 are reaching their end of support in 30 days. We covered this story when the announcement was made a few months ago, but as the deadline gets closer, we just want to make sure that folks know if you are not moving to 365, there is an alternative. You'd be able to use Exchange Server SE to continue having an on-prem Exchange instance. However, you will want to make sure to choose from one of those two adventures, as there are not going to be additional fixes or support. And as we know, staying up to date on patches is going to be one of the biggest factors to vulnerability to exploits and attacks. So this shouldn't be too much of a surprise. End date for mainstream support was in 2020, October. It's been kind of continued support, like life support for the last few years after that. So I don't know that we've got a ton to cover on this one. We will share the September notice from Microsoft with more detail on your options and process for switching to those. But I think maybe let's touch on, I think the first thought for a lot of folks, myself included, is love yourself more. Why would you still want to manage email on premises? Like, there's a better way. But that's not, that may be the most common situation, but it's certainly not universal. So let's talk about, some of the reasons why folks may still opt for on-prem, who that may make sense for. I think, one of those folks are folks that are dealing with really strict compliance requirements. If they have to, have very strict maintenance of data custody, there are certainly Gov Cloud solutions, for example, that can help meet those standards on the federal side. But for some organizations, they may choose to go the route of continuing to own that infrastructure. Gents, anything else that you can think of there?
Potentially cost was one consideration I was thinking of. I think that there's a lot that has been done to mitigate that migration from a CapEx to an OpEx cost when you're talking about going to one of these, because that's what these are. These are all going to be subscription-based services, right? At the end of the day, I would challenge people who are concerned about the cost, though, to really consider it. It might be a fear of the unknown. These things have been around for a while, though, so it's time to, I think, really take a look at whether you need to have that still be on-prem. I think that there are some cases, maybe there's a compliance framework out there that requires you to have an Exchange. I am not aware of that personally, but like, let's say there's something that requires you to have very, very good top-notch physical security, then I think even in those instances, GCC high is a thing that exists. But then that might creep into the cost.
Right, then we're getting back to the cost side
right.
of the equation.
But yeah, it's one of those things where I can't really think of a good reason, at least in the experiences that I've had, to continue going down this on-prem route for Exchange in particular.
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts. One is I love the idea of people holding out on a cloud-based Exchange server. It just like feels like so legacy old school to me, like with the times changing and AI so futuristic. I love people are going back to more like mechanical type of hosting. That's just a personal thing, but it is harder. It does make you more vulnerable. Generally speaking, it does. The thing that I thought of was so we talk a lot with our manufacturing customers about things like IoT and legacy in-house products. I've seen online that it is a lot easier to hook those things into a on-prem Exchange server. So maybe some integration stuff. If your business runs on some in-house legacy type of system, you might opt for on-prem Exchange.
Yeah. I think you touched on something that is a primary culprit in unoptimized security decisions, Justin, which is that idea of like the devil you know, right? That even if you take a look at the support, the the capabilities, all of these things, and can line up those pros and cons columns, and on paper it looks like this is going to be a easier, cheaper, fill in the blank adjective solution. There is that emotional or I think responsive kind of reaction of, but I understand this, I know this, I've managed this, it's worked for us until now. Why would we make a change? But like you said, you have the choice in a lot of situations of paying a understood and clearly communicated cost now, or taking a gamble on potentially a much larger cost down the road. And I did not grab my glasses before we started recording, so let me just put this doc up on grandma mode. And looking at our threat suspects and risks for the week, we've got so these are our most changed trends for new watchers. These are not the top 10s of what we've seen because those are relatively static week to week. These are the greatest change, either increase or decrease in frequency seen on Blumira's platform. On the threat side, we've got dumping LSAT's memory using comservices.dll. This is a new one appearing for the first time in the last 14 days. Possible data exfiltration notification on LastPass. Call out of the web UI privilege escalation on Cisco iOS, a story that I believe we talked about previously. And we had 3 of those appear in the last couple of weeks. Sentinel-1 unmitigated PUA or adware, and ESET categorized malicious file, rounding out those top 5. Anything stand out there?
I would like to chime in on the Cisco iOS web UI privilege vulnerability.
Please.
It's funny because not only did we talk about it before, but just recently there was some scanning being done of Cisco devices on the broader
Yes, thank you.
like on the broader web, just in general. And so I think it's concerning that we're seeing this still, because I think there was patches that have been released since then. So like that stuck out to me. This LastPass possible data exfiltration behavior. If you're using password managers, those are the kings to your kingdom, right? So that would be extremely worrying to me. There was one here that I saw, Microsoft 365 login via Azure SDK Python agent. Those are something that may be something that's like programmatic. Maybe you're using something to automate something, right? But threat actors also leverage the same things. So bear that in mind when you're hooking into your tenants via APIs. Automation is great. Just visibility and knowing what it is that you're doing so that way you can identify the suspicious behavior is important.
On the risks front, so again, these are concerning trends, but ones that would rank a lower priority. These would fall more usually into the issues that have yet to manifest as active threat problems. So let's take care of it early. On the Linux side, we've got an unusual file attribute action on Linux. mass deletion of M365 objects, a user account lock on Okta, login from Tor exit node, and a G Suite external doc share. So again, these are not things that guarantee that there's an active incident or attack happening. They certainly could be activities that are part of an attacker's pattern, but they also could be unoptimized practices in the environment that could get some proactive love and attention. So we can chat about these, and then we got to go back up because when I zoomed in, I skipped right over our suspects.
Yeah, I'll chime in really quick and just point out the Linux logging service shutdown. There was a drop this week, so that's good that's not happening. But there's been a lot of attacks recently that focus on the logging services. So CrowdStrike, Sentinel-1, and the malware is actually just looking to shut down those logging services. So it's been an age-old debate if how important it is to observe the service being shut down. So I like that we're detecting on it, and I think it's important to always investigate if you do see something like that happen.
We also saw a Azure failed single-factor PowerShell auth attempt that had a drastic reduction. So normally in these trends, we're looking at a relatively small number of instances, either going from a handful of appearances back down to a normal mean of 0, or a increase from relatively low frequency to slightly higher. But when you're increasing from a small starting point, it's a greater percentage. This one was a pretty drastic reduction, a reduction of about 3/4 from 402 last week, 520 the week before, to 118 this past week. Any insights onto why we may be seeing that drop week over week?
I think part of it is people just getting better. At least that's my hope.
Yeah.
People are blocking this. Conditional access is working as configured and intended. So that's at least my hope. That's my wishful thinking.
Right. Hey, I am all in favor of us having more wins to celebrate in the industry.
Yes.
I feel like there's a lot of reasons to have new concerns, put some worries back, but it's nice when we can get a win. So it's good to see a reduction there too.
Yeah.
So moving back up the escalation scale of concerning for a moment to our suspects category, we saw a admin share discovery, MS SQL login failures, Defender for endpoint, multiple suspicious connections blocked by network protections, password dumper remote thread in LSASS showing up here a second time, and end user report of suspicious activity within Okta.
I'm glad that we saw a reduction in the risks. At least some of them reported a reduction. But one thing I noticed when I was looking at threats and looking at suspects for the most changed is that we're seeing all rises right now.
Yeah.
And I think this is a good time to just call out the fact that as we start getting into Q4, or at least yearly Q4, maybe not fiscal Q4, this might be some people going into fiscal Q3. One thing, with holidays coming up, there's a tendency to see more rises in attacks because we as people, we are all human, tend to let our guard down a little bit more, it feels like, during the holidays. So be on the lookout, be extra vigilant. Let's break the cycle this year. Let's see some reductions. I really want to celebrate that just as collectively as a community and for my own mental health.
Right.
Doing what we do day in and day out, like it would be great to see some reductions as we get into the holiday season rather than rises. But more specifically, looking at the ones that you called out here, I liked seeing this Okta end user report of suspicious activity. It means that somebody reported something suspicious in their Okta environment, so that way people could take notice and take alert to it, and we alerted to the fact that happened. That's great to see. Hopefully people start utilizing this a little bit more because people are not only your weakest link, but they can also be your strongest asset, getting you visibility into some of the stuff that machines aren't very good at. like potentially suspicious activity?
This is one opportunity to cite one of my favorite former coworker quotes. A lot of folks will do things like security awareness training around phishing and look at the totals. You had 50 people click on the link the first time you ran the phishing test. You sat them down in a room and wagged your finger at them for a few hours. And then after you ran that again, that time you only had 25 people click on it. So that's a 50% reduction. We're doing pretty good, right? As my former colleague Rich Smith used to say, that actually means you're only 50% on fire. That's still not a great outcome because, it really only takes one of those actual attempts being successful to result in a big problem. It's much better to focus on motivating the actions that are going to help you find and address this earlier. So pushing for speed to report and not just having those negative stimuli of you failed the phishing test, so now we're going to yell at you, but positive stimuli of celebrating the first 5 people to send it in to security, making it clear that it's okay to forward non-malicious emails that you have a passing concern about to security versus being on the fence about whether it's an issue and deciding it's probably fine and just deleting it. Focus on the action that is going to help you move forward if something were to happen, rather than trying to reach a state where no user ever makes a mistake.
Yes.
Yep.
That should be the theme as we go into the holidays. Bring back the positivity in the industry and the community.
Exactly.
Let's celebrate the wins, even if they're small.
Exactly.
Justin, I love your call out of let's take the time before the holidays to get some of these things in place, hardening your environment network before we can, safe and soundly hibernate during the holidays. So maybe we can do some fun marketing push with that. Let's lock down our little hibernation areas before the holiday comes.
Yes.
Preserve your most precious asset, the magic week between Christmas and New Year's that makes time disappear.
Yeah.
So we mentioned in passing a massive NPM supply chain attack that story had just broke before we recorded last week. Another story coming this week, giving us a more positive update in the theme of this week's episode, that despite a maintainer with access to multiple widely used NPM packages having their account compromised through a password reset phish, in a supply chain attack that saw about 10% of cloud environments downloading compromised updates, thanks to rapid detection of the compromise and coordinated response within about 2 hours of the initial infection, resulted in the attackers netting less than, well under, $1,000 in total profits. So a potentially massive, industry-wide story being really, really limited in terms of its amount of impact in reality, not because the attackers weren't trying to be more successful, but there were strong protections in place to identify malicious activity, to intervene quickly. And so I think part of the reason why this didn't go as badly as it could is that the end goal of these attackers was deploying crypto mining malware. The attacks alternately were targeting browsers for Ethereum or Solana signing requests, or if users entered a crypto wallet address, they were replacing it with the attackers. It's worth noting this attack, in addition to getting a few very popular packages like Chalk and debug-jas, also affected the DuckDB maintainer's account. So, a 2-hour window before resolution could have had much broader impact if they, say, opted for an info stealer versus going for crypto mining. So there is a little bit of luck in the intent of attack there, but definitely identifying and responding really quickly stopped that from being a watering hole they could return to, and turned out to be about $50 worth of Solana, about $420 nice of Ethereum. So all in all, netting under $600 for something that affected initially 10% of cloud environments. That's a win. Like that is, I think that there's a conversation, we've touched on it before, but this idea of, on a long enough time span, incidents are inevitable, but major disruption or damage doesn't have to be. That idea of planning that someday, somewhere, something is going to go wrong, and it's better to plan for how to respond to that than try and build a plan that nothing ever does.
1000% agree. Couple shout outs, props to Wiz for their research on the topic as well, for determining scope and sharing that information with the public. Props to the person who got attacked in the first place, because without them being honest and forthright about what happened and reaching out and taking proactive action, it could have been a lot worse. So yeah, just continuing on with this theme of positivity apparently today. I think there's a lot of wins, little wins that can be celebrated too.
Yeah,
definitely.
I want to shout out all of the technologies nowadays that detect on things like this. This is like something that everyone honed in on as soon as we got the first whiff of a Bitcoin miner in a browser. So, there's even the slimmest tech stacks these days can detect things like this. So shout out to all the companies that took the time and effort to do that.
It is interesting, this kind of wider trend that at the same time we're seeing a shift in the dominant kind of catastrophic attack methods, like it was ransomware was rising up and up for a long time. Now ransomware has started to decline, and we're seeing a massive increase in info stealer attacks. But at the same time, we're also seeing some widespread, very successful attack methods that ultimately are going after the less obviously malicious, certainly not benign attack methods of, crypto mining, where the impact is reduction in available resources kind of immediately, and adware spam attacks. So it's interesting to see all across the attacker sphere this shift in the dominant methods that are being used. And at the same time as we're seeing, attackers adapt to where they're finding the most profit in these kind of most direct attacks, we're also seeing a rise in maybe attacks that are going to attract less targeted law enforcement attention. I'm curious to see what we find about that, but I've definitely noticed it in the headlines we've seen over the last few months. All right. I'm sorry, I'm going to harsh the buzz for a minute. We are looking at a headline about Microsoft forcing install of Copilot starting in October. Forcing install is slightly more alarmist than in practice. This is going from opting an opt-out that is clearly communicated to a opt-out that is much more obfuscated and pushed out to users. So this is going to force install on Windows devices with 365 desktop clients starting in October. Actually, it started last year, completing coming up soon. Installation will not occur on systems in the European Economic Area. So again, this is one of those situations where we're seeing some governmental regulation of data protections having some impact on more risky decisions pushed by vendors. So the idea is that Copilot is going to give centralized access across 365 and all of your productivity apps. It will be added to the start menu and enabled by default. You are able to opt out through the 365 apps admin center. Also worth noting, as part of this story, Microsoft is integrating Copilot agents into the Edge sidebar and adding a taskbar pinning option. So if you do want to opt out of this, you're going to sign into 365 apps admin center, obviously with an admin account. Go to customization, then device configuration, and then modern app settings. Hilarious menu naming. Select 365 Copilot app, and then clear the automatic installation, enable automatic installation of Copilot checkbox. So I think, it's been maybe a month since we had a story specifically talking about Copilot. We've had a story just about every week looking at a new method of injection attack, some of those being researched methods, some of those coming from after action research on actual attacks. Copilot itself got targeted with a zero-click attack that would embed a hidden injection prompt into a email that had no other malicious attachment of its own, but it would just kind of wait until a query was made of Copilot, which would then by default go and pull email messages into the context that it's reviewing to answer. And at the time that it reviews that context and looks at that email, it then interprets and follows through on that injection prompt. So is it, I want to not be overly harsh in my wording here. Is it less than prudent to make this something that is increasingly difficult to opt out of, while one of the other biggest trends this year that we're talking about is the need to formalize a program around AI governance?
I was going to make a joke about Apple forcing us to listen to the new U2 album a couple of years back,
right?
Even though no one wanted it. So being able to opt out is great. I'll play a little bit of devil's advocate and say Microsoft machines come with a ton of crap that we might not even realize exists. So the bloatware, junkware, whatever you want to call it. So this is just one more thing they're baking into their app suite. So it's tough. Obviously, with this being so new, it's Copilot, new technology. We're seeing more attacks come out of it, like you highlighted, Zoe. So I'd be very reluctant. I think a lot of people are reluctant to see how security, keeps an eye on and, evolves with these AI programs. So, I think it's a scary timing for this. Just because we've been seeing more and more of these attacks, so I'm a little worried about it.
Yeah, agreed. So LLMs, AI in general, are tools, and the goals, right, that we normally get out of this is making everyday tasks a little bit easier. But those same things that we use to make our lives easier can also make attackers' lives a lot easier. Playing around with prompt injection too, in the limited capacity that I've been doing it in, has yielded, let's say, some interesting results. I would have liked to have seen Microsoft adopt an approach that would be similar to how Apple does with Siri and Apple Intelligence opt-in rather than a manual opt-out, like an automatic opt-in, manual opt-out, like it's taking right now with the current process that Microsoft is going through. Less than prudent is a good choice of words, I think, for how I would also describe that. There's a lot that can be done here to make it a little bit safer. And like with any new technology, we're seeing like this rapid adoption rate too. And people aren't really fully understanding everything that they're tying it into. And so, I would, this gives me pause. If this was me in my environment or even just my home, I would personally be looking up how I can take some steps to mitigate some of the risks that are coming with this.
I remember when Siri first came out for Apple iPhones and people were like, it's going to take over your phone. It's going to drop malware. So people were disabling Siri. And, Copilot is Siri literally times a million, maybe more. So I can guarantee there's going to be org-wide opt-outs for quite some time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To try and add our practical lessons piece that we always try and include as we're talking about one of these topics, I think there's a lesson to observe here about the impact that process and ease of compliance with process can have on effective security. Changing from a opt-in to an opt-out workflow is going to have a impact on how frequently folks are aware that they have this service enabled. There's a discussion to have about, for some folks, it's something that they will appreciate and get a great deal of use out of. For others, it may be something that they may never leverage or use, and yet may still have installed because they missed the buried menu where they could actually make a change there. In my previous life, I worked on a trusted access report that looked at huge volume of mobile device security stats. And we found that there was 2 changes that happened. I think this was 2017. We saw an increase in lock screens secured by PIN or biometric go from 74 the previous year, 74%, to 94% in a 1-year span. There were 2 major changes that suggested having an impact on that number that were new to that year. One was, I believe both Apple and Google switched to a initial device setup process that gave you the option to not set a PIN instead of asking if you wanted to set a PIN, and the wider use of biometric unlock factors. Like, if you look at absolute risk, you still have to have a PIN backup. If you enroll Face ID, fingerprint scan, facial scan, you still have to have a PIN as a backup. So in absolute risk terms, you have 2 potential points of failure instead of 1. But the much more likely risk is an unsecured device being lost or stolen, and making it easier to comply with that process made it much more widely adopted and resulted in a great increase in effective security. So I think whether you are a developer team looking for ways to build more trust with the folks that are using your software by shifting left and being more security aware in the development process, or if you're an admin that's trying to figure out how to roll out a new process within your environment, think about that usability. Think about how clearly communicated the necessary action and the reason why that action is important is communicated.
Yeah. Another example of that was back in like 2017. People were accidentally making their AWS 2017 and before, making their AWS buckets, S3 buckets, public. Even though they were by default private, you could still do ACLs to make them public on accident. So then in 2018, AWS introduced the block public access setting. So even you could do the ACL to make it public. If you had that box checked, it would be private. So just kind of related, like you need those extra steps to make sure what you're doing is the most security focused step forward.
Looking at a couple of our strategy story here, we saw a write-up on the Salty 2FA phishing kit, an analysis of some of the methods that are being used by this malware as a service toolkit. The researchers at Ontanu Cyber Defense Center found studied a sophisticated phishing campaign using Salty 2FA, and then enumerated some of the methods that are being used, including some advanced evasion techniques. They are rotating subdomains based on the session used, assigning unique domains per victim to make it harder to detect trends in access or activity. misusing legitimate platforms. There's a story that we skipped for this week about the growing prevalence in prominent attacks that are misusing legitimate commercial RMM tools. We're seeing an easier process of identically replicating corporate pages, brands, menus, layout, language, using Cloudflare's turnstile service to block automated analysis, as well as targeting specific organizations and tailoring their methods to the industry targeted, and using distributed infrastructure so that attacks aren't being leveraged from a single point. In the article, it talks about, again, the importance of user awareness. These are leveraging a good deal of social engineering tactics as well. But I picked the story because there's a lot of increasing trends that we see that are being demonstrated here, using more sophisticated lures, oftentimes getting AI copy to make those a lot more convincing. Gone are the days of just looking for the obvious typos to know if it's coming as a fish rather than legitimate. Misusing legit tools to bypass safety measures that are in place, and specifically focusing on 2FA bypass methods as that strong authentication becomes a more standard practice. I don't think that, we touched on this before, I don't think user awareness alone can be the solution, when part of the reason that this is getting more popular is that it's easier than ever to make fishes that are harder to detect than before. So I wanted to open it up, what are some of the other things that we can be doing? I know, Justin, you've been a strong advocate of putting more protective measures in place from the admin side, enforcing least privilege, making sure that access to services is limited, that folks don't have just open admin access to their machines and are operating as local users. What are some other things that we can do?
I think strong microsegmentation, there's a good argument for that too. And I think we're even going to talk about a little bit how that interplays with like zero trust later on. The thing that also I would recommend in scenarios like this is defense in depth approach, right? Like you said, user awareness alone can't be the solve. You have to have that onion style layered defense where if one thing breaks, you have either the visibility or the ability to take proactive steps to stop and mitigate these threat actors in their tracks. What's I guess not really surprising, but is more of a concerning trend as of late. I think it was either last week or the week before where we talked about a similar operation where they were doing some very similar things where they were I think they were even able to get legitimate web hosts from these organizations to serve up like duplicated content. It's the enterprise scale that's concerning here. I don't think that these people, at least in this story and the other story that I'm referencing, are really doing anything new or novel. It's just the scale at which these things are happening now. We need to get better in adopting maybe not the buzzwords, right? But at least the principles and the ideas behind the buzzwords. Zero trust is one of those things. Microsegmentation is one of those things. Being able to adopt even just better firewall practices, more auditing, more visibility, SIM. I know coming from the SIM people, that's, kind of tooting our own horn a little bit, but like all these things have interoperability and interplay with each other to make you more resilient overall, right? And then we always have to account for us being humans at the end of the day. And we're great, but we're extremely flawed. We can be tricked really easily. So we need to plan and account for that too. But also as a user, it's not just being aware, but just being proactive. And security is everybody's responsibility and everybody's job. It doesn't matter what your job title is inside of an organization. If you even just take an extra 5 minutes a day to just think a little bit more critically about the thing that you're about to click on, and report things, even if it's not, even if it ends up being like a total time waster, there's always that what if, right? What if that could have been malicious? And Nick, I think you've done a lot with your team at teaching a little bit more, so you probably have some other tips too.
Yeah, you touched on most all of them. Just next gen firewall, whatever that means these days, but a sophisticated firewall, I'll call it. Just checking DNS and automatically, obviously, as well as SIM, tooting our own horn as well. So just having a security stack that can detect on these common copycat like attacks.
My default position on talking about stuff like that is I'd love it if you use ours, but please use someone's. Like,
Yeah.
it is end of the day. I want to see folks well secured. Hopefully we can help them do that, but whether or not that's the case, I still want to see them secured.
Yes.
One more encouraging story. I do want to make sure we get to talk about the Zero Trust headline as well. But it's encouraging to see that ransomware payments and ransom amounts are plummeting in education. There are a number of factors that are contributing to this. This is coming out of a new study released by Sophos. Finding that ransom demands have dropped by 74% in lower education and 80% for higher education. But wait, there's more, because payments have gone down even more, an 88% decrease in lower education. And higher ed payments dropped from 4.4 million to 463,000. So that's just about 90%. I'm not a mather. But another factor is that education, which I think traditionally is a industry that folks would not have had towards the top of their list of attractive targets, has gotten serious about preventative and responsive security measures in place. We're seeing faster recovery times, lower recovery costs because more protections are in place. A high rate of data recovery success. 97% of providers with encrypted data were able to recover it. You compare that against kind of the broader stat of something like 80 to 90% of backup plans are not tested before they need to be used. Like, this is a notable overperformance versus the broader security landscape. But I think that, again, there's not always a ton of win stories, so it's great to look at the ones that we do find, not just as an opportunity to celebrate, but also as a good object example when we're trying to make the case for the need for security in our broader organizations. I think that making sure to have strong measures in place, refusing to pay ransom demands, these are things that security folks have been saying for years and years. But it's harder for making that case when leadership is like, security costs have to stay flat or go down, or, well, we're offline and parents and administrators are calling and yelling at us, so just pay it so we can get back online. It's good to have some examples that are showing, no, doing the harder in the moment thing can pay dividends in time. And we're seeing it have an impact, not just, in an isolated instance, but across education as a whole. So any ideas or thoughts on kind of how admins and analysts can convey that importance to their leadership? I think having some stories like this in your back pocket is going to be a good option, because I think that it's much easier for people to understand less intuitive things if they have a concrete example to look at. But what are some other methods or tactics?
Yeah, I think that's like the big thing, right? Like, security is hard. Security can be expensive. I think that it comes down to not just really, if we echo back to just one story above, like, security is everybody's job. It is tough though when, especially I'm assuming for lower education, where you have, actual kids who are computer savvy, technology savvy, but not necessarily security savvy. Like, it can be hard to manage all those things. I think that seeing this story and seeing maybe the models where I think there are schools are starting to, and school systems in general, are starting to band together and use like combined purchasing power, which is also another strategy. Like if you're in a school system and you're able to do that, fantastic. Leverage that as a collective buying power to argue for lower rates. That way you can reduce that cost, and then it can get leadership more on board. In areas like the school district where I'm at right now, everything is judged basically by a school board, and you have that board answering to regular people like you and me. So it can be really hard to find one experts in the area as well. So try and expand your networks to be able to include more people as well in those conversations. As a parent, though, I just want to call out, because my son started school this year, that I hope that these same numbers hold true for my school district.
Yeah.
And I know personally, like for me, like I really want to get involved, even if it's like a voluntary basis. So if you are a cybersecurity person, if you are a tech person, see if your school needs help in that. Leverage your contacts, and maybe that they don't have to work as hard to try and get buy-in from everybody else as well.
It is a great call out, that think global, act local idea within security. There is no one is an island when it comes to security. All of us, our security is not dependent just on our actions, but on the actions of those that we are connected to and communicate with. So if the altruism of helping to keep children and families' information safe is not sufficient, consider too that doing that local level of education and assistance for folks that may not have that skill set natively has a cumulative, communal, beneficial impact too.
Yeah. And there are so many examples now in the news as far as like conveying this to leadership. Huge companies, small companies, local governments, police departments, things like that, that have been bankrupted by ransomware. So if your leadership hasn't seen these examples, maybe it's worth writing up a little report based on the field that your company is in, and say, hey, look at these. They didn't make it through this. I also wanted to comment on the reduction of these ransomware, whether it be the ransomware attack or the fee or whatever. Even just 10 years ago, networks were generally like pretty flat. So once ransomware got in, it was like detrimental to the network. So now I think over time, we're seeing people just get better and better at hardening their network, which may constitute for the reduction. I hope that's the case. But it's just really great to see that people are just getting good at this stuff. It's really awesome.
Yeah, agreed. And there was one last thing too that you brought up and kind of touched on, Nick, too. People are getting better at this stuff, and that was evident in the data too. A large portion of the reason why this happened is people got better at detecting earlier and responding to earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something that not just the education sector can take as a lesson learned and a good pat on their back for the work that they've been doing there, but that's something that we should, in every other vertical, be looking at to emulate. Early detection, early response, and a layered approach are some of the best things that you can do.
Yeah.
And, ounce of prevention, pound of cure kind of situation, having these systems in place, having stronger backup plans, having response plans in place for when common scenarios may occur. All of these are having an impact as well, for sure.
Yeah.
To close us out for this week, blow out the candle. Zero Trust just had its 15th birthday. The headline here is Zero Trust is 15 years old. Why full adoption is worth the struggle. So let's talk about the struggle. Zero Trust, of course, being that idea, not necessarily don't ever trust anyone for anything ever, but rather that trust shouldn't be inherited and should be evaluated and reevaluated as conditions change. There's some good comments in these articles. From Suresh Katakam, Zero Trust is most effective when deployed with modern cloud-native enterprise architectures that are intentionally designed to enforce security at every layer of the infrastructure. There's a extended analogy made by John Kindervag, who wrote the original paper on Zero Trust while at Forrester, about if you see somebody in the living room watching TV that you've never seen before, you wouldn't assume that they're okay to be there because they just are. And so we shouldn't take the same approach to strategy. I think that there's been some good resources provided. Recent example being the implementation guide that NIST released that gave some kind of concrete examples of environments set up with different approaches to accomplishing that zero trust goal. But there's also been some factors that have worked against its adoption. And I think one of the ones that you have to touch on is its buzzwordification. It was the next big thing for a while, and it was being used as basically a product name or a SKU versus a methodology that can be applied, in a number of ways within the environment. So I think, we're seeing that there are benefits from adopting a zero trust strategy when its ethos is followed and done consistently across an environment, but it's an uphill struggle. So, what comes next? Can this be reclaimed and those wins be touted as evidence that this is something worth taking a second look at and investing in? Or do we just need to new Coke it and just come up with a new name for the same kind of approach, where zero trust is kind of an extension of traditional best practices to accommodate expanding environment moving past the perimeter? What do you think? What can we reclaim zero trust, or should we take the lessons of zero trust and try and give it a fresh coat of paint?
Yeah, I do like the new Coke idea. We could call it totally sus or something like that.
Yes, perfect.
New buzzword. So first off, congrats on the 15-year anniversary. I think there's a lot of wins, and they talk about in the article too, getting every organization to fully comply and implement the spirit of the framework and the general nature of it too is hard. But companies have been moving, I think, in large respect, in the right direction, right? I think that there's still a perceived cost with it, both in terms of security getting in the way, because the idea, right? You're supposed to just implicitly deny everybody, and they have to prove that you are someone to be trusted inside of the organization. And having that, again, with that layered approach, there are different tools that you can use to get that done. And I think that people just start thinking about that and probably get a little bit overwhelmed. And I think that's totally fair. It is overwhelming, especially if you're in a large, complex environment, or even if you're in a small environment and you are an IT person and you've heard of zero trust, but you haven't actually looked into it. Like the NIST guide is a great resource. There are tons of wonderful other resources too, from many, many different organizations. Also, for any gamers out there, remember Reach. Reach was also 15 years ago, and my knees didn't hurt. So I'm probably dating myself a little bit on that one. But yeah, I mean, I don't think that we need to rebrand Zero Trust. I think Zero Trust is and has just become something that has entered into the zeitgeist of our best practices. I think it just goes by several different names. Mm-hmm. There's something to be said, though, in terms of a retrospective on the industry, particularly on the vendor side, of how we leverage buzzwords and how we market things.
Absolutely.
So maybe there's something that we can do to be a little bit more responsible in that. And I think generally we've been doing a good, or at least I thought we were doing a good job until AI came out. And then that kind of made me also take pause. But yeah, if you're not already adopting at least some of the principles from Zero Trust, I think that you really should reconsider.
Well, any final thoughts before we close it out for this week? I certainly feel better than I usually do going through a long list of massive concerns and terrible stories. So this has been a nice break from the mean.
Yeah,
Yes.
I can get used to this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us once again. Thank you to Nick and Justin for hopping on and sharing your perspective. As always, you can find us next Friday at 1 p.m., where we'll be back with the latest news for you. Until next time, everybody, hope you stay well, stay safe out there, and we'll be talking with you soon. Bye-bye.